Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Happy Wednesday. My name is Audrey Stewart, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's event with Emma Smith discussing her new book, This Is Shakespeare. She is joined in conversation today by Davis McCallum. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our new digital community during these challenging times. Our spring season is ramping up, so make sure to check out our event schedule at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. If you'd like to purchase a copy of This Is Shakespeare, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you, especially during this difficult time for community spaces like your local bookstore. There will also be a link for donation in the chat if you would like to give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases and financial contributions make this virtual author series possible and, now more than ever, supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support, especially now. And as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings this past year, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can, so thank you in advance for your patience and your understanding. Now, I am so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Emma Smith is a professor of Shakespeare Studies at Oxford University. She has published widely on Shakespeare and other early dramatists, and her lectures have appeared on several podcasts. She was also a script advisor for the 2018 film Mary, Queen of Scots. She is joined by Davis McCallum, who is the artistic director of the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival. Davis has directed The Winter's Tale, Measure for Measure, Richard II, and more. He is currently leading the organization in establishing its first ever permanent home, scheduled to open in the summer of 2022. They are here to discuss Emma's new book, This Is Shakespeare. So much of what we say about Shakespeare is either not true or not relevant. Emma delves into the history of Shakespeare, which is just as dramatic as the plays that are listed under his name. And I'll leave you with this quote from one of my favorite writers, Hilary Mantel, who is the author of the Wolf Hall trilogy. I admire the freshness and attack of her writing, the passion and curiosity that light up the page. And on that note of praise, I'll turn things over to our authors. Emma, Davis, thank you so much for being here tonight. The virtual podium is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. I'm delighted to be here. Emma was my professor at Oxford more than 20 years ago. And so we would meet once a week in her office and just talk, really. And that's really the game plan for this evening's event. I just want to say at the start, I'm a huge fan of this book. I was sending it around as Christmas presents at the end of the year. And it feels like a book that people who love Shakespeare and people who are curious about Shakespeare will equally enjoy. I wanted to start by reading one sentence from the book, which I was teasing Emma about a moment ago. It's in a chapter on King Lear, and it says this: "Now, textual differences are like lampposts to canine Shakespearean critics, who can snuffle around happily for pages savoring the gamey presence or absence of a comma or a changed pronoun, parentheses, watch me." And that kind of panache in a sentence of Shakespearean criticism really makes the reader feel like you're present to the author. And I had that vivid experience reading the book. So Emma, my question to you is, in addition to being a brilliant writer, you're a great teacher, and you've recorded these podcasts of lectures on Shakespeare, where you can hear the students at Oxford responding to a joke or murmuring or their approval. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this book came out of your experience in tutorial or in lecture as a teacher.
Thanks, Davis, and thanks for reading that sentence out. Yeah, this is a book which really does come out of teaching and conversation, and it's been a great privilege of my professional life to have the chance to talk with students, but also with theatre makers and with theatre goers and with sort of interested people who are interested in Shakespeare, and that's quite a big group in the UK. You know, Shakespeare's got a particular place in our kind of cultural life that's slightly different, perhaps, from the place in the US, where nevertheless, you know, there are some very keen Shakespeareans. So I've enjoyed the chance to talk about, you know, big questions about Shakespeare and about interpretation. And along the way, actually, that's helped me to think about how to frame some of the things we as literary critics talk about, but often seem to be simply talking to ourselves, or talking within the academy. And I've got a huge amount of respect for highly scholarly academic work, but it's not really the tone in which I think I am most comfortable. So I've tried to write a book which draws on those conversations and on the questions that I was asked, and that doesn't lecture. I mean, it draws on lectures, but doesn't lecture in that way. It doesn't tell you what to think. And I hope it encourages you, readers, to think, to realize that they do think, or that they can think, and they can think differently. And this is not a closed, esoteric world. This is not the ivory tower. This is a great kind of cultural property, which is really open to all of us.
I love that idea. I was saying earlier that when I came to the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival as the artistic director, one of my first and most, you know, heartfelt directives was that under no circumstances would we refer to Shakespeare as the bard. In part because I feel like that connotes this kind of inert and distant, fixed idea of Shakespeare. And that in the rehearsal room, Shakespeare is a very fluid thing. We do change words and cut whole sections and kind of are continually in this process of remaking. And you've identified that quality in Shakespeare as gappiness. Will you help those of us who might not know what is gappiness as it relates to Shakespeare?
So I was thinking about a Shakespeare who is, on the one hand, full of ambiguities, full of things that can be taken in more than one way, but also full of holes. So full of lots of the questions that we ask about plays actually are really good at identifying these holes. So what is Iago's motivation? That's a hole in the play, and it's a hole that we try and fill up, and people have tried to fill up in all kinds of different ways. But it's a kind of a gap. And I was thinking about the words for gap, which are all tend to suggest something is missing or something is lost, rather than that there is a wonderful space to sort of spread out in and think, oh yeah, that's where I come in. You know, this isn't a complete and sealed cultural unit. This isn't that I just have to stand outside of. It's got this space in it, and that space is for me to bring my experience, my life kind of views, my priorities, my creativity, and sort of fill it out. So I was thinking about a Shakespeare who I really think is incomplete, and in some ways that's the incompleteness of the theatre script. You know, Shakespeare starts to look very different if we call these scripts, because immediately the script suggests this is something waiting for something else. This is just part of the story. This is like a recipe. It's not the dish. And we don't tend to think about, outside the rehearsal room, Shakespeare as a script. So partly that gappiness is a function of drama as a written form. But I think it's something more hardwired into Shakespeare's own view of the world. And I think it's probably the reason that Shakespearean biography has been so tempting and so kind of unresolvable, because it's really hard to deduce back, what did this person really think? What did they want us to think? What were they trying to say? I don't think Shakespeare is amenable to those questions at all. That we've really just got these texts.
You want to pluck out the heart of my mystery, you know, right?
Yeah, absolutely so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you say, for example, one of the things I just have a bit of a side swipe at in the book is that I'm not really interested in what Shakespeare thought or what Shakespeare intended. I mean, in some ways, because we can't know. So was it, and when scholars tell you what Shakespeare thought or intended, it tends to be spookily similar to what they themselves think. So it's a kind of corroboration by absence. But also because these plays aren't Shakespeare's. I mean, they really are ours if they've got any life at all, and it's we who need to go with it. So I'm not sure, for example, to take a contentious example, I'm not sure that for me, it's possible to say that The Merchant of Venice is or is not anti-Semitic. It can be played in a way, and has been played, and has been taken in ways which are deeply anti-Semitic. And it's also been performed and interpreted in ways which really, by revealing the anti-Semitism in the Christian community in the play, really lay bare those prejudices. And I think the play is both of those.
Yes, that's right. I really, as a director, I feel that really profoundly. Sometimes you feel this pressure when you're interpreting a play for the theater to make a definitive interpretation. And I always have been resistant to that. And I don't think it's interpretive cowardice. It's the sense of like, well, if the play's really going to work, we have to keep enough space for the audience to participate in it too. It's never the same on Tuesday night with 2/3 of a house as it is on Saturday night with the packed house. And the energy in the theater is a little bit different, even if the actors say the words in more or less the same way. I was saying earlier, like a play like Measure for Measure, which I think is a really critical play, like a turning point for him in writing plays, where even the title suggests this sense of kind of balance, and it's a play about extremity and moderation. And if the director comes stomping in and decides to put his or her finger on the scale on one side of that balance, you've really lost the richest interpretation of the play from the start.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think Measure for Measure is such an interesting play for our times now, because I've also, one of the things I've come to realize is that it's a plague play. It's about what do you do with a city that is sick, and there are two extremes. One is kind of mad carpe diem sort of sex. That's what you do. You grab onto, in the face of this sort of pandemic, if you like, you grab onto something warm, near to you, and that's how you're still alive. And the other extreme is a kind of don't touch me kind of standoff. And in this play, Shakespeare deals with it through the framework of sex, and it's about sexual contact. But I came to think in that, partly because we were all talking about, did Shakespeare write King Lear in lockdown, and is King Lear the play for now? I started to think, actually, I think Measure for Measure is much more about the pull to physical closeness and to kind of resistance. So I completely agree. You're absolutely right that Measure for Measure is a play that has that sort of balance in it. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the way the Elizabethan grammar school really, I don't think they knew they were doing this. This is good for any sort of teachers on this call with us. I don't think they knew they were doing this, but they were really brilliantly training up a generation of playwrights, because this big staple of the classroom, this big classroom exercise, was what was called in Latin in utramque partem, arguing both sides of the case. And it was much less important for, I guess it would have been a good training for lawyers too, and there's lots of overlap between law and the theatre. And I guess, what that classroom staple required you to do was to imagine what it was like to be on the other side of the argument. It didn't really matter what you believed. You just had to make both sides of the argument or both positions seem plausible. And I think Shakespeare really ran with that training.
Yeah, if you're a person who believes that truth exists in some definite and knowable place, you're more likely to write a novel, right? You can get into this internal space where you can articulate exactly what is happening in a character's inner life. Or you can approach it from a bunch of different sides. But in a play, for people who believe that the truth exists somewhere in the space between two points of view, the theater is a beautiful format. And I do think Shakespeare was precisely that kind of person. Maybe that's that negative capability that keeps
Yeah, I really agree with you, because one of the things that most strikes me, my book is not a biography of Shakespeare, because I don't think Shakespeare's biography is actually all that interesting for helping us with the plays. But one thing that has that I've been thinking about again, sort of in these, as we've been thinking about Shakespeare's relevance to this difficult, current difficult times, we know that when Shakespeare first goes to London to try and make it as a, as a country boy, as a rural kid, he goes to the city to try and make it in the theatre. And within the first couple of years, probably 2 or 3 years of his being in London, before he's established himself at all, there's a major outbreak of plague and the theatres are all shut. And he writes during that period in 1592-3 two absolute blockbuster poems, Venus and Adonis and Lucrece. And Venus and Adonis particularly was the big bestseller of Shakespeare in print in his own lifetime. If you'd met, an Elizabethan in the street and said, "What do you think of Shakespeare?" they'd say, you mean the man who wrote Venus and Adonis? And so he could have been, but this is a long way of saying, he could have been a brilliant and respected and sort of high status narrative poet. He had form on that. He could do that. And he never does it again. He writes 2 in, 9 months or something. And then, he goes back to the theatre. He must have thought, I think he was a real, people who love the theatre, people who make their life and work in it like you know that, I think that was his medium, absolutely. And with all of that, unknowability and unpredictability and teamwork, is not really a place, is it, for a control freak?
No.
If you're a sort of creative control freak, you would not give your work up to actors to mumble out and to audiences to sort of misinterpret. You would, as you say, do a different genre. So I think Shakespeare wants this from us, this activity of actively engaging and thinking.
So how did you decide which plays to include? Because I also kind of admired that it wasn't like, oh, let's march through all 37 plays. You were selective about which ones you wanted to play with, and I use that word, precisely. What was your selection criteria?
Well, I didn't have anything as grand, probably, as criteria. I suppose I wanted. So I've got 20 chapters and 20 plays, and in most of the chapters, I'm thinking about something specific about that play, but I approach it via some other, I don't know, piece of information or way of thinking, or perhaps a bit of theatre history or something. So I wanted to try and, I didn't want to do the same thing with each play. And I suppose I chose the plays a bit that would allow me to do different things. I chose things that I like. I'd enjoyed very much lecturing on Comedy of Errors, which is not a play that most people would have in their top 10 or even their top 20, but that I felt was actually had some really, really interesting things to say about identity and individuality. It's a play about 2 sets of twins. Yeah, and I left out some things. I think one of my great failings as a Shakespearean is, I don't know how many people, I'm going to look at the numbers now, see how many people will leave. I don't really like As You Like It. I find it quite boring and too much sitting down and singing in the woods and stuff. I can't be bothered with it. So I didn't put that in. And I thought that probably the more general audience that I hoped I could engage with this book might be less interested in, I don't know, Cymbeline or something, or Timon of Athens, which are not that often performed and which perhaps were a bit more, a bit more off most people's radar. So it's a bit of a compromise. Two plays I would have liked to have squeezed in: Titus Andronicus, I think, and Henry V. But
those are both great ones.
Mm.
I mean, I loved reading the book because I felt like you would often take something small or seemingly small and then blow it up to reframe the whole play in a unique way. Like I loved your chapter on Twelfth Night, which focuses almost, not entirely, but starts by investigating why is Antonio in the play? And that struck me as such a rehearsal room question. You know, you're sitting around the table reading a play on the first day, and everyone's trying to think like, oh, what's this play about? Or how do I connect to it? And if you've got 20 actors, somebody's playing, Valentine.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I'm curious about Twelfth Night, but I want to figure out who is this guy Valentine and why is he in the play? Why does Shakespeare need Valentine in the play? And of course, nobody cares why Shakespeare needed Valentine, but the play needs Valentine for some reason. And you have to justify that space. And actors are brilliant at that. And I don't think critics either have the time or the patience or the imagination to enter a play in that way.
Yeah, I think I had learnt a bit from actually from seeing a bit of that rehearsal room and looking around the table and seeing, all these people are going to work really hard to put this play on. And, these two are the main characters. And this guy, is going to play three other small parts, but, he's as vital to this play getting done as the others.
Mm-hmm.
In thinking about Twelfth Night, I did want to think a bit about the way Shakespeare resources his own plays, because one of the things that is significantly different about Shakespeare as an early modern playwright is he is a house playwright. He's part of a theatre company, and he's writing, therefore, for the same group of actors or an evolving group of actors over his whole career. He isn't like Ben Jonson or Thomas Middleton or John Marston, who is pitching a play to one of the companies and then them saying, yeah, we're interested in this, and him writing up a couple of acts and them saying, yeah, we'll take it. Shakespeare is much more able, I think, to build on the talents and the capabilities of the actors he's got. We can see that when later in his career, the King's Men clearly get a brilliantly talented actor who can do women's roles. A male actor, of course, all women's parts were played by men in this period.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about Robert Armin replacing Will Kemp.
Yeah, and Armin the fool who replaces Kemp, and we get these much more melancholic, existential kind of figures rather than the more slapstick figures. And one aspect of that dependence on the company, I think, is that I think Shakespeare is really adept at how you can get, how you can write for more characters than you have actors, and how you can make that work so that they have time to slip out of one costume and quickly slip into another one.
Yeah.
But it does mean that extraneous characters or seemingly extraneous characters are actually quite expensive in terms of the sort of overall resource of the play. And Antonio, who is the sailor in Twelfth Night, who sort of rescues Sebastian, who is an important character, who's going to come in and resolve the sort of love triangle at the heart of this Illyrian plot. Antonio seems, he doesn't seem really all that necessary. And I tried to sort of poke around in that, and that helped me to think about one of the things I think is really remarkable about Twelfth Night for us now in the 21st century. Two things, actually. One I didn't write about in the book is that I think it's the closest we get to thinking about forms of kind of trans identity, which I think are really, really striking and really interesting, and wouldn't have been visible to readers of this play even a decade ago. Most readers of this play even a decade ago. But also that it's a play. Relatedly, it's a play that it's however straight-laced you are, it's really hard to sort of de-queer it. I don't think that is just a 21st century phenomenon. It seems to be a play which is really interested in male friendship, male love, perhaps same-sex desire or sex, and how that intersects with or pulls against marriage, which is what's coming at the end of comedies. And that gives a way in which Twelfth Night is a different play for us now than perhaps it was, even 20 years ago. And that feature of the chapters is probably a residual legacy of the lectures. So the lectures that underpinned it, I started with each one with a question. I shouldn't say this because the Harvard Bookstore does really need you to buy the book if you can, but if you really can't, or you want a taste of it, you could just listen to the lectures, which are easily available if you Google them. They're called Approaching Shakespeare. And in the lectures, I start each lecture is about a question. So I say, why is Falstaff fat? Why?
How should we feel about Bolingbroke taking over?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Those kinds of things.
They're always such thrilling questions.
Yeah. Why does Hamlet have the same name as his father?
Yeah.
So I do take a thing which seems not very important, but sort of somehow try and sort of vocalize some questions through that. And there are some traces of that. There are some traces of that still in the book.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about? Should we talk a little bit about adaptation, or I read that hilarious sentence about textual critics loving to start a merry war over a comma that is either in or out. And in the theater, of course, we're rigorous about how the text is spoken, and yet we're also kind of freewheeling about, let's cut this whole section, or let's when I did Cymbeline last year, we had a problem they didn't have in the Jacobean Playhouse, which is, where do we take the intermission? You can either take it here, and it feels like we haven't yet put all the cards on the table, or we can take it here, or we have an hour and 28-minute first act, and that's too long. And we decided to take it right in the middle of a scene when Imogen goes into the cave, and interpolated something else out that gave us a way to start the second act. But we're very free about that in the theater. I guess my question is, do we need to hang our heads in shame at playing that way? And I'm sure your answer is no, but I guess another way of asking the question is, why are we so parochial about the text? Why this insistence on, this kind of idea that it's some kind of sacred text that is inviolable?
Yeah, I think, I think what Shakespeare critics or Shakespeare editors are supposed to say is that they have worked very hard and sort of scientifically and rigorously to establish, out of sometimes the mess of the documents that have come to us from the Shakespearean period, they worked really hard to establish a kind of authoritative text, and therefore, that's what we should work with. But in fact, in many cases, that's just simply not true. We have variant texts of, say, King Lear or Hamlet, and the game of trying to say, well, this is better, this is more Shakespeare than this, or this is Shakespeare's first draft because it's not as good, and this is his revised draft because it's better. Those are not really defensible positions, because anybody who works in the theatre knows that a script is a fluid entity once actors and the other parts of the theatre get hold of it, and that they change for all kinds of reasons, and that to have a play script that exists in 3 or 4 versions is nothing strange. Perhaps what the Elizabethan printing house doesn't have is very good version control, and that that different versions are circulating. So I suppose there's been a lot of work by a lot of work of scholarship has been trying to say this is the authoritative text. And so maybe, the scholarly view, and a lot of scholarship has been saying, people may remember this from school days or university days, kind of grinding through every word and saying, this is really important because this is a pun, and this is really important because, this is the theme of, light and dark, or clothing or something. And so we go through saying, every damn word is really important. But you're absolutely right that the theatre, I think I think Shakespeare himself in his own theatre would have been, and was, as far as we've got the evidence, absolutely willing to think, that won't work that won't work at this point. That needs updating. That's never really worked. Let's amplify this a bit. X can't carry this song, and so let's give it to someone else.
Yeah.
So I think Shakespeare, in as much as that matters, wouldn't care about it at all. And I think that theatre directors, particularly in my country, need to be bolder in cutting the text.
Mm-hmm.
We often say that Shakespeare really lives in the theatre, and I think that can be true. But I also must say that some of the most boring evenings of my life have been spent at Shakespeare plays, particularly in about Act 4, where you think, my God, you have really lost energy here. Why does Hamlet go on with the pirates? What on earth is going on there? If Shakespeare were in MFA playwriting 101, you'd say, now really, there are two or three appearances of pirates in Shakespeare's plays, and every time it's really like he's saying, oh la la la, I just don't know what to do now. Let's have some pirates.
I have that feeling when I'm in the third week of rehearsal. I remember in the Winter's Tale, after the sheep shearing scene, there's a long scene with Camilla where he's like, now you're going to go here and you're going to go there. And they're like, we got to get through this.
Absolutely.
We've got to get back to Leontes, or we are dead in the water.
That's right. The Winter's Tale is a really difficult play to put on, because you can write all the time. If you're in your study, you can say, this is a play which begins with this really intense marital jealousy tragedy, but then that only lasts about an hour and a half, and then the play sort of looks at its watch and thinks, oh no, and then we've got a long scene which is a rather labored pastoral comedy, and then we're moving to a resolution. And that pastoral bit, I mean, I can write about it and say it's really important that we sort of insulate ourselves from the horror of what's gone before, and this is kind of recuperative, and it's been winter and now it's harvest, and these are, you can make it, you can sound as if it works brilliantly, but if you've actually got it in front of you to try and put on, it's a task, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, Act 4 of The Winter's Tale is pretty hard.
Yeah, you have to have a great Autolycus, or you're just out of luck. Yeah. He's got to kind of step in and carry forward, the kind of engine of the play.
So sort of trickster singing kind of cheeky, lovable rogue kind of figure.
Somebody who suggested that perhaps, he was doubled with Leontes, because I don't think they're ever on stage at the same time. I could be wrong about that. Do you think Shakespeare takes up too much room? I mean, we've talked about his capaciousness for room for interpretation, but here I am running a Shakespeare theater, and you've published a book called This Is Shakespeare, and we are living in a moment where there's a question: is he occupying more space than he should? And when American theater publishes their list of most frequently produced plays, they don't even include Shakespeare, because if they did, he would have more productions than the next 10 writers put together. And it's hard to say, it should be so because 'twas ever thus. What's your take on that?
I feel a bit conflicted about that in certain ways. I mean, I think that Shakespeare's plays can be a tremendous resource for thinking creatively and intensively about important issues in our own world. And I think that Shakespeare's plays often give us the resources to read them sort of against the grain. So they give us women characters, maybe female characters, who it's possible to sort of redraw and make them more prominent, for instance, or it's possible to think about the way they depict outsiders or power relations and give a sense that the disempowered can talk back through the play. So I think they are extraordinary plays for us to bend and shape to our own concerns. But I would have to agree that sometimes that they dominate the cultural sphere in ways which aren't always very helpful for Shakespeare either. There's too much pressure. There's too much pressure on the plays. There's a lot of overclaiming. There's a sense that this was quite a high. This was a high point of this for me. A colleague of mine who I very much respect wrote a piece in his local paper in the US about what Hamlet can tell us about Black Lives Matter. And I thought, actually,
I heard your Breadloaf lecture about that.
That's the wrong thing to say. Actually, that's wrong. I mean, we might be able to reverse that. It's possible that Black Lives Matter could tell us something about Hamlet, but actually, really, that's not where we should be looking to understand, that particular phenomenon. So I think sometimes, and I'm obviously participating in this. Really, sometimes we sort of overstack the Shakespeare cards and make his works do too much for us. And sometimes you think, actually, what would have been better would have been to have a new play that was directly on these issues, and to have space for it. But I suppose the reality of theatre is that there are some audiences who are very keen for new things, but a lot of our theatres are reliant on some level of audience familiarity to get them to come. And Shakespeare is a big calling card.
You do kind of wonder whether there are certain plays of Shakespeare's that wouldn't be revived if they weren't Shakespeare plays, and there's some theaters that have Shakespeare in their name that'll try and complete the canon. Like, we've done all of the plays, and I just, as a programmatic matter, I just have no real interest in that.
No, that seems like sort of, that's a sort of completist, a slightly weird kind of completist sort of fetish, isn't it? That you have to get the weirdest, misprint somehow into your collection. And I think, but different plays pop up at different times. They become prominent in ways that we wouldn't have expected. There is a central core of plays by Shakespeare which is pretty much always in the cultural mainstream. But then other plays, sort of sidle in and seem like things that we need or we have needed. The great example of that is I think Troilus and Cressida, which nobody ever could make sense of it. What was this play about, and what was the tone of it? And it's really the Vietnam and the Korean War and US theatre directors who say this is the perfect play for talking about a sort of unwinnable war. We don't even really know why we're fighting it, and a kind of cynicism. And there was absolutely, it was a completely rediscovered play for that time. And I think, that's a very exciting aspect of some of those more marginal plays.
Yeah. Well, we got some questions from the audience. Let me review this.
Oh yeah, let's talk. I'm going to review this first one from Mary about how great your Cymbeline was. And because it built on what we're just talking about sort of traditionally difficult plays. Please, will you talk a bit about that production, which I didn't see?
Well, I was saying to you earlier, I feel like there are certain plays which are like the Paul McCartney of the Shakespeare canon, As You Like It being one of those. And I just really like the George Harrison plays of the canon, and Cymbeline and Measure for Measure and Richard II and Winter's Tale are all kind of somehow pushing out the boundaries of genre. And I also like doing those plays because it's not like, oh, what's this production going to do with Twelfth Night or Hamlet or Macker's? Simply, and I just thought we just needed to take it very much at face value and try and tell the story as clearly as it could possibly be told. We doubled Cloten and Posthumous, which is not uncommon, but creates a kind of central performance that can kind of hold the play through the fourth act. And I thought it was a play about grace, ultimately. And so we didn't start the rehearsal process thinking we would get ensnared with the question of whether the forgiveness that is the kind of miracle of the fifth act of that play was deserved. We all knew it wasn't deserved, but the play says that it's given. So how can we build up to that moment? And the payoff in the fifth act of that play is so enormous. It's just hilariously funny and moving in this entangled way that feels very unique. My regret was that we perform outside under an open air tent overlooking the Hudson River, Emma. And I thought, if there's ever a theater where you could have an enormous bird of prey fly into the theater at the end, this would be the theater that could pull it off. So I had this absurd, kind of ridiculous series of conversations with bird handlers all over the Northeast to try and convince one of them to let me have one of their birds. But ultimately, we weren't able to pull that coup off. But it was that was the kind of flirtatious with the ridiculous that characterized that production.
And I think one of the things, sort of picking up on the second part of Mary's question, one of the things that's so important with plays that where most people who go to them won't be on top of what the story is to kind of reassure people that it's going to be fine. They're going to understand it. I mean, I think we've probably all had that kind of panic in a way where suddenly random people start speaking on the stage and you suddenly think, I don't know what you're talking about. Just stop. Who are you? Where are we? What are you important? Are you telling me something important, or are you just lying? And I think there can be a sort of panic where you think, I'm just not going to be able to grasp what's going on here.
And it's going to be so long. I'm going to be forced to endure at least 2.5 hours of it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Which comes to Robert's question, were audiences in Shakespeare's time more patient than I am? I think they were less patient, probably, Robert. I think they were doing other things. I think they were certainly not sitting, as it were, in the dark, absolutely silent. They would probably be chatting when it was boring, getting up and going to get something, having a drink. I think there's more activity and a bit of a sense. Sometimes if you look at the plays with that in mind, you can see, oh, here's a bit of a catch up now. This person's telling us something we actually already know. And that must be...
cup, says Claudius. And we're like, yeah, we saw the whole scene.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing about that is, and I'm aware that I'm really missing this in the COVID-19 moment that we're in. I miss actors and I miss the rehearsal room, of course, but I also miss other audience members. And I feel like that would have been a very primary aspect of the experience in an open air circular theater like the Globe, the sense of like, what's that person doing over there? And are they listening? And are they laughing at something that I'm horrified by, or vice versa? Where you have to kind of negotiate the e pluribus unum of being in an audience, singular.
Yes, and a lot of modern theatre etiquette is designed to minimize the presence of other theatre members, isn't it? It's, we say, don't use your phone or rustle your program because it's annoying to other people. Don't talk, don't make a noise because you don't want to draw attention to yourself. And it's interesting to think how that theatre etiquette, I think, is probably very different from the pleasures of sociability, aspects of sociability that were part of theatrical performance.
You know more about this than anyone, but I think there's somebody's done a study of, if you totaled up all of the seats in public theaters in Elizabethan Jacobean London on a Saturday afternoon when they would all presumably be playing and full, it would be some astonishing percentage of the population of London would have been at the theater.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the theatre is the primary entertainment, you know, kind of locus for this whole era. It really is extraordinary. I mean, yeah, there are you know, thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of theatre visits. You know, every month there is a huge. And what we don't know, it's interesting, there are relatively few longish runs of plays. In fact, even the long runs of plays are sort of 8 or 9 days. That's all. Most plays are on, you know, spottily, perhaps over a month or 3 weeks in this period. And what we don't know is how. What there certainly seems to have been, rather, is a cohort of people who went to the theatre every week or twice a week or 3 times a week. They just went all the time.
There's another question that I think is an important one to talk over. What does decolonizing Shakespeare look like, and how do we do it? I love the both parts of that question.
Yeah, that's a really important question, and thanks. We don't know the name of the person who's asked it, but thanks so much for asking it. So in some ways, I think this builds on the some of the kind of pivot points or flips Davis and I were talking about earlier. So if we take a play like The Tempest, for instance, which is a play sort of deeply implicated in the colonial moment at the time of its first performance, it is about, in some ways and in some complicated ways, but in some very straightforward ways, it is about the establishment of Jamestown. It's about European English settlement in what would become over the next centuries and next decades New England. It's a play in which the Caliban, Prospero's servant, Caliban and Ariel, actually, Prospero's servants are in some ways, you know, native to the place that he has come, and he has established his own government over them. So it's a play about colonialism, and which is really steeped in those values. It's also a play which perhaps in its afterlife has been one of the most interesting resources for post-colonial writers to sort of write back to the center, if you like. So the Martinique writer Aimé Césaire, writing Un Tempête, for instance, which is about the ways that how Caliban and Ariel are kind of are able to resist the Prospero figure and sort of establish their own sort of culture, their own language, retain that against his oversight. So I suppose what I'm saying is, you know, it's an example of what one of the quotations I love from the philosopher and thinker Walter Benjamin is about, which says every document of civilization is also a document of barbarism. Every document of civilization is also a document of barbarism. And I think, you know, the Colonial Tempest is in a way a document of barbarism. That's what it's about. But it has become a document of civilization because it has given the sort of resource for its own undoing in the writings of others. So that's quite a long sort of a long answer, which says, I think Shakespeare needs to be decolonized and can be decolonized because a lot of the work by writers from former or existing colonies, writers of color, writers from communities excluded from sort of traditional Shakespeare have been able to rework and rewrite and replay Shakespeare in their own idiom and for their own purposes and with their own community in mind. So Shakespeare's the problem, in a way, in the sort of problem of the colonial curriculum. And he's also actually, his works are also actually the answer if we take a wide view of the whole range of creativity that the plays have been able to sustain in other people.
I mean, I would just say he's probably the most prolific and successful collaborator, in the 400 years since he put down his pen. He's continually feeding new forms of art. And I think it's the gappiness that is the invitation to collaborate.
Yeah. What
Let's
about spots to view Shakespeare online? Depends what you're looking for and what you want. So if you want theatre or the sort of nearest thing to theatre, you could look the London Shakespeare's Globe in London has a player with a lot of their performances. It's a really interesting way to see how that theatre on a sort of Shakespearean model, how that works. It's a good time to go, back through the movies and the sort of older performances that are available very widely on Amazon Prime and those kinds of things. This is a good time to watch, I don't know, Richard Burton or Olivier or those other kind of classics. What would you suggest?
I was going to mention the Globe too, just because it's such a unique. I think they do a good job of filming them. I'm not. I don't really enjoy watching Shakespeare through the screen. I hate to sound like a traditionalist because I'm really not, but I just there's something about the being present, my body being present in physical space where an actor is inhabiting language that's 400 years old and making it feel like it's new minted in the moment. That's really that's the whole thing for me. So I'm missing that and longing for it. Wish I had a more helpful answer. This is a question for you. Shakespeare's often perfect for interpretation by directors. Do you have particular themes or styles you enjoy seeing or wish you could see more? I'll say this, just to jump in. I have never been able to set a Shakespeare play in a particular moment, like we're going to do Much Ado About Nothing and it's going to be about, demobilization after World War I, and you can set it in this particular moment and it's in a country house. I've never been able to hold on to a setting in that way because I feel in some unavoidable sense that the real setting of all the plays, whether it's in the Forest of Arden or in East Cheap or in, prehistoric Britain, is really the stage, the place where the actors meet the audience. And I've never been able to get past that. I hate enforcing on a play a external sense of homogenization. Like I got taken to task for a scene in Richard II, the scene between the Duke of York and the Duchess of York and O'Merle, where they suddenly start speaking these ridiculous rhyming couplets, and we just let it be as ridiculous as it felt to us on the page. And people were like, "Whoa, it's Richard II. It's supposed to be a kind of a solemn affair, start to finish." And I just thought, it's not the kind of playwright we're dealing with. He's very heterodox, different thing now for something completely different. What's your thought? What do you think about a directorial style?
It's interesting to think about. One of the things we've seen quite a lot in UK productions, not just of Shakespeare recently, is the use of video. So a sort of a sense that the theatre is employing some of the techniques of film, or is using film kind of within it. And I think it'd be really interesting to think whether we want to go back to that, or whether after this enforced closure of the theatres, that those moments and those qualities of liveness that you've just talked about, Davis, are the thing that we're all hungry for, and we won't want these sort of hybrid techno kind of modern designs. I'm not a stickler for, you know, original costumes or historical costumes or those kinds of things. I mean, that's a very anachronistic thought. That's not how Shakespeare's plays were originally performed. So I enjoy directors who have a vision for the play and want to, you know, want to bring that across. I think I'm quite open to that. One thing I think we do get a bit too much of in the UK is some of those, highly located and decorative versions that Davis is just talking about. So, you know, we're in a country house at Christmas and everybody is exquisitely dressed, and it's like going to the Met or something. You think, okay, maybe it is $500 a ticket, but the boots are lovely.
I'm going to wrap up two of these questions here. What do you want to see from Shakespeare perform for kids, and how should we introduce Shakespeare to young people? And why are we so concerned about indoctrinating the younger generation in Shakespeare? Should we be bothered about that at all?
Well, do you know, I mean, I'm not an expert on you know, teaching children, and I know that there are you know, teachers and parents who are, you know, really great at introducing the stories of Shakespeare and you know, some of the witchy language or those kinds of things, and their kids enjoy it. But as you just suggested, I don't think it is an absolute good for children to do Shakespeare. I think a lot of Shakespeare is quite adult, in not in the most obvious ways, but in the kind of cognitive sophistication that it requires. It's a thing for grown-ups, and I think it's like, you know, olives or something. I think it's an adult pleasure, and I think if children don't like it, I think that's fine. I think they will come round to it.
Right.
I don't feel too stressed by that.
I'm thinking about your chapter on Midsummer.
Yeah, in my book, I say that Midsummer Night's Dream has been really hobbled, actually, as a play by the sense that it's a play for children. And that's made us, you know, produce it in some very sentimental ways, and in some ways which really avoid the sort of dark, grown-up sort of sexual psychology that I think the play opens up. So I mean, I'm not saying children shouldn't do Shakespeare, or that we shouldn't try and give children. I think children should go to the theatre. I really think children should enjoy that kind of real-time, border, you know, magical, the kind of magical combination of imagination and performance that's theatre, which is quite different from screen time that they're so good at. So I would think that children should go to the theatre, but not to see Shakespeare.
I have two kids, 12 and 9, who have really kind of grown up around the theater, and the thing that I hope they carry with them is the sense of like being at the you know, the back of the vom with a bunch of actors who are, you know, waiting for their entrance and teasing each other and forgetting a prop and running on stage, and to have two little kids back there who are just waiting for their dad to leave the green room so they can go home, but they get to watch that incredible moment. It's one of the reasons why I love the theater, of a group of people backstage saying, let's all enter into this act of, you know, make believe together. And it happens right when they hit the light. You know, it's so fascinating.
Yeah. And there's a reason that, you know, the theater is the only place where adults, you know, do play. You know, a thing we associate with children. I think that's actually really important. I see Audrey back. We could keep chattering away, couldn't we? But it's been really wonderful to have that opportunity and to have those questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I gotta say, I wish you would keep talking. I really have enjoyed this talk. It's been so much fun. I miss the theater so much. I'm sure you both do as well. But thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us tonight about Shakespeare. This has been a really, really lovely conversation, and Thank you to everyone at home who is showing up today for authors, publishers, indie book selling, and the incredible staff at Harvard Bookstore. Check out the links in the chat. If you would like to purchase a copy of This Is Shakespeare, you should. It's a great book. Do yourself a favor. Thank you. And please remember to shop local, shop indie. From all of us at Harvard Bookstore, be well, stay safe. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.